as we are going to go to the final sprint reaction of the season, as the 2025 season that's now turned on bitterly disappointing for Scuderia Ferrari is drawing its curtain also on the set of course the ground effect aerodynamics regulations. So in this final sprint reaction to the sixth sprint obviously race of the season, we will tell you everything about it, and from the perspective of the suffering Ferrari's biggest fans, we will tell you exactly what we should have done to, of course, go ahead and win the race, right, and win this sprint, because and we will also make a great recommendation for what we call the sprint championship, for which you should also receive this magnificent Formula 1 Grand Prix winner trophy, or any other similar trophy, which I think would have for example help to spice up over here, especially the end, the final Grand Prix as well, because let's be honest, this was probably one of the least eventful sprint races that you have in the recent memory, definitely this season. And I think while it didn't move the championship a lot, if the Grand Prix is going to be very similar in terms of the performance of the teams, it's gonna be head to head, I believe, between the orange pair of the McLarens, which are obviously Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. But sadly for us, with Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton, the Swalica champion, the Ferrari's biggest fan and Ferrari's fastest driver, obviously not racing here, but winning in Qatar. I'm sure you've seen the brilliant Qatar sprint victory, that eluded me last season. So I'm absolutely over the moon, to win, especially after I didn't get such a good start. And challenging conditions. I have to say, for the drivers, definitely at the beginning. Also, with regards to the tire wear, which will be much bigger of an issue, obviously, in the Grand Prix. But, for us as the Ferrari drivers, as the Ferrari boys, I cannot believe, but some of the turns, especially, these very quick two right-handers, I believe the turns, 4 and 5 or 5 and 6. I'm not sure of the exact numbers. This is where we were losing the most times of actually any team. So the setup is definitely wrong. But the great thing is that obviously, we can now go ahead, change the setup, and make sure that we are ready, to definitely finish in the points and at least aim for a podium, because at the moment it looks like we will be finishing 4th in the Constructors' Championship if we have a bad race here in Qatar. Definitely, if the sprint results would be the same, we actually would hardly even have a chance to fight for the 3rd place for a team that's always been second pretty much throughout most of the season. This is a spectacular fallout, and I think a lot of it is tied down to the qualifying, right? So over here in these excellent sprint reactions that obviously we already started the last Olympic year of 2024, we will tell you how we could have won. And even though obviously finishing 13th and right at the back 17th, with Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton respectively, is a total disaster. The fact is that where you qualify is kind of where you finish, right? Just look at, for example, the top 3, right? They were as they were, even though, for example, you had a bit of a contact between Norris and Russell. Obviously you had the Red Bulls attacking for a while, but in the end, you always do have that advantage, right of the line. And obviously with the cars being super modern, obviously I wouldn't say that difficult to drive in terms of the inputs. Definitely difficult to drive in terms of, for example, the porpoising, the bouncing, right, as the air goes underneath you. You can definitely feel some of the drivers, they are struggling a little bit with these regulations. So it will be interesting what happens in 2026. But it also, for example, means that all of the teams have fine-tuned it to the point that it's pretty much a qualifying season, right? So the qualifying is extra important, unlike in the past, unlike definitely in the first maybe couple of years of these regulations. And as a result, when Piastri qualified in pole position, but Leclerc was actually only 4 or 5 tenths behind, it might seem like, okay, 9th place was terrible. Same for Hamilton, who was just 2 or 3 tenths behind Leclerc, but then immediately dropped him to 18th. So what is very important is, to get a setup right. You can definitely find a couple of tenths there. As we fine-tune it, I would say maybe teams like McLaren or maybe Aston Martin with Alonso, they are already at the top of their potential. Sadly, probably Red Bulls will get better. We will see what the Mercedes will do, but definitely us, Scuderia Ferrari, we will get better with better setup. And obviously, for example, like with Leclerc's and Hamilton's the final qualifying times, they were kind of influenced by the dirty air, of the slow moving, for example, guys like Carlos Sainz, right, or the other racing bulls, and that does play a role because obviously, if you lose a couple of tenths, it can be, not just, for example, a couple of positions, but a couple of rows, on the starting grid. So instead of starting 4th or 5th, where Leclerc thought he should have had, he started 9 and 10. And obviously, after the start, because he didn't get a good start, he was, kind of in the middle of that first Tarzan-like corner there in Qatar. He got overtaken from left and right, which was disappointing, and then obviously ran a little bit wide, so lost additional positions. And Lewis Hamilton said that despite the fact that we finally kind of changed, starting from the pit lane, I wonder whether there was a setup change or if we put in the new components. But definitely, it's good to try the setup. And now at the end of the season, the fact is that we're still getting to these races and we don't know exactly why the car is slow, or we need several sessions to fine tune it. Is a bit of an issue, right? Because let's not forget, we were always very strong over here, which brings me over here to the sprint championship, which of course means that over here we would be deciding who that would be. And yes, I just quickly counted it. I think this is a great initiative that Formula One should definitely adopt because these sprint races, they do little in terms of the overall championship. So sometimes they might be a little bit dull, especially when there is no action, right? Even though when you're racing it, it's actually quite exciting because you can go quicker, you can usually push the tire, right? There's not so much of the degradation. You only do one stop, basically 100 instead of the 300 kilometers. But if you would have that sprint championship, right, you would already have some of the action going on, even though it looks like the sprint championship would go the Red Bull and Verstappen's way. Sad to say that, but yeah, they've been really good. But for example, Lewis Hamilton would be fighting for that sprint championship. Oscar Piastri was actually quite strong, unlike, let's say, Lando Norris, who usually didn't do so well in the sprint. So yeah, it's quite interesting, and it would be interesting, let's say, after 5, 10, 15 years, right? How many, let's say, sprint champions you would have compared to the regular champions. If the regular champion can also get a sprint championship, especially if there is a runaway leader in the championship, that would add the extra spice. And frankly, I don't understand why the F1 doesn't include it, because I just became the sprint champion, right? Yes, you've seen it, the overtaking Verstappen, with authority. That was for the sprint championship, as well. And I found it really, really exciting. So definitely, do check out my race. And yeah, for us, I have to say, it was all about the qualifying, right? So on Friday evening, once Hamilton, only qualified 18, didn't make it into SQ2 sprint qualifying 2, SQ3 sprint qualifying 3. That was a problem. Leclerc also should have timed it better. I believe if we were 4th or 5th, and maybe with better setup, we could have maybe gotten very, very close, because at points it did look like, we had a decent speed. Let's not forget we finished 2nd in a race here last year. So, I'm still quietly optimistic, but, if we don't do well in this Grand Prix, now we're losing the touch with Red Bulls, because all of a sudden Tsunoda has woken up, out-qualified Verstappen out of nowhere. That was very, very weird, but of course, considering that Verstappen made that mistake, in qualifying, it does make sense. And yeah, as a result, that will make it difficult for us to overhaul Red Bull. And with Mercedes, Russell and improve Antonelli, Hamilton's gonna be looking behind his back, so he doesn't lose 6th, in the championship. So overall, it will be, interesting what happens in the race. That is for sure. For the sprint, as I said, once the red lights went out, kind of Verstappen made a couple of positions from 6th to 4th, then you pretty much, you were as we were, and, there were hardly any overtakes, right? So for us, as Leclerc, instead of losing 4 places, if you would gain 4 places, if you would have started, 4 or 5 places higher, we could have won, the sprint. Certainly Leclerc could be a dark horse for the Grand Prix, and, I'm sure that Lewis Hamilton, I'm not sure, again, starting from the pit lane, if they did change the components or not. I really hope they do, because this is a great initiative, right? You change the components, you start at the back, and then, you are able, have kind of a faster car, in a race trim, just like, for example, what Verstappen had in Brazil. So I hope that that's happened, but obviously I'm not so sure if it, if Ferrari really has executed it this way. But anyways, it was all about the qualifying. I did enjoy the sprint. Obviously, few of the gaps, it kind of stabilized, and you can see it's kind of like that, how to call it, yeah, you can hear that wind before the storm coming, right? Which, you know, the championship can be decided in the Grand Prix. So we will see what happens. You think Lando Norris will be a new champion that we will have, or will it go to Abu Dhabi with 2 or 3 drivers? At the moment, looks like it will go to Abu Dhabi with 2 drivers. It will be interesting. But yeah, for us, you know, the main focus must be on winning the race. Because let me show you now on this beautiful Scuderia Red Retina iMac how the final sprint race of the season finished. And it's, you know, so much different from how strong we were in the first sprint, obviously, race of the season, which is hugely disappointing, something I didn't expect. But, you know, hopefully that shift to the 2026 car very, very early on will pay the dividends, because if not, there will be big changes. So over here, let's take a look. So here we will turn our Scuderia Red Retina iMac around. We absolutely love it. You know, it looks yeah, beautiful. Over here, Oscar Piastri returning to winning ways. Congratulations to him. He really needed it. Yeah, but he can be out of the championship contention. George Russell again, you know, showing just how well he's running, and obviously, you know, a firm 4th in the standings. You know, he finished about 5 seconds behind. Lando Norris, who can be crowned the world champion over here, did a good job, but again, you know, qualified 3rd, finished 3rd, easily held off Verstappen, right? So you can see with the experience, like Norris saying, hey, you know, it's almost impossible to overtake here. Yes, Qatar, great track, obviously, you know, having that World Cup stadium, as you saw my introductions, it is great, but of course, you know, the place it's held in, and especially, you know, I would say, you know, the fact that you cannot overtake kind of, you know, takes that glitter away from it, doesn't it? So, Verstappen, you know, there's not much FIA can do apart from disqualifications now, I think, to help the Red Bull. Yuki Tsunoda, that was actually quite an interesting fight between him and Andrea Kimi Antonelli. They finished 5th and 6th, and both went kind of, you know, off the track, you know, especially, you know, that the difficult turn, I believe it's the turn 10, you know, when you have to go very much to the right and, you know, go 7 to 4 gear, go to the left. Definitely check out my hard lap videos. Yeah, I was surprised just how wide the cars went there, you know, that, you know, shouldn't be happening. But yeah, they both got a 5-second penalty, so actually they finished, you know, Tsunoda, I mean, this is what he should have been doing. Obviously, he, I think, for sure will be replaced. I think we will, by Isaac Hadjar. We will, I think, hear that announcement very soon, but that's what he should have been doing, you know, much, much earlier. That would be the only way for him pretty much to retain that Red Bull seat. 7th, then Fernando Alonso. I think he will be a little bit disappointed with that, considering that he started 4th, and, you know, pretty much, you know, at the end of lap 1, it was all about keeping that 6 from Antonelli, which he didn't mention due to his mistake. Funny, right? 44 years old and still made a mistake in a final corner where, you know, you just gotta be 5th, 4th gear, you know, and don't go on the power early, you know. 8, Carlos Sainz, you know, putting in strong performances and beating Isaac Hadjar of Racing Bulls. They won't score any points though, and also his teammate Alexander Albon, but I guess too late, you know, to reverse the trend when Albon absolutely trashed Sainz, obviously, right at the beginning, right? So over here, let's take a look at what it means for that now all-important 2025-2025 Drivers' Championship. Lando Norris extends his lead to 396 points, but his gap between him and his teammate Oscar Piastri has reduced to 22 points. Oscar Piastri on 374 points, and for the 3 points behind, 25 points from Norris. Max Verstappen, the reigning world champion. The main focus over here, you know, we gotta make sure, you know, that you know, it would be great if Norris finishes ahead of Verstappen, because that will protect Michael Schumacher's record, right? So, wow, the calf is still there. So a lot of, obviously, you know, pressure on Norris to deliver. However, on the other hand, we as Scuderia Ferrari can simply go disrupt the fight just like the Mercedes, for example, and that will be enough, right? But if Verstappen is winning, we disrupt the fight and McLaren's finish 5 and 6. You know, obviously, you know, that would make for a really big finale in Abu Dhabi. As things stand, I think it would be interesting to see it between Piastri and Norris. What happens? Will there be another crash? We will see. So yes, still the 3 drivers in it. George Russell is 4th for Mercedes. He's gotten to 301 points. 5th, Charles Leclerc didn't even score points. You didn't even see him there. That's how catastrophic the race was in terms of the result. But I think, you know, thankfully with the sprint, you can really turn around the setup. I think now we know how to set up the car, and we will be much better in qualifying. Charles Leclerc on 226 points. he will finish 5th. 6th, Lewis Hamilton, Scuderia Ferrari, 152 points. We do worry a little bit about Hamilton with his kind of reaction, even kind of giving up at the end, maybe trying different setup and the things, but still, you shouldn't just, throw in the towel, even though it's a sprint. You have 152 points. Andrea Kimi Antonelli is 7th for Mercedes, 140 points. And I think it will be absolutely critical to finish ahead of him here in Qatar. That would kind of, rubber stamp that, Hamilton will finish 6th, where I believe he deserves to finish for a season. 8th is then, of course, Alexander Albon Williams, 73 points. 9, Isaac Hadjar Racing Bulls, 51 points. And looks like that promotion to Red Bull Racing is imminent. 10, Nico Hülkenberg kicks over 49 points. Can he hold on to that top 10 spot? Because 11, Carlos Sainz Williams has gotten the points. He's on 49 points. If Williams will be strong over here in the Grand Prix, then Hülkenberg will lose that place. 12, Fernando Alonso, of course, Aston Martin, 42 points. He's a bit of an outside bet to finish in the top 10. 13, Oliver Behrman has 41 points. 14 is then Liam Lawson Racing Bulls, 30 points. He might have a good chance still to move up the table. 15, Esteban Ocon has 32 points. 16, Lance Stroll, Aston Martin, no lucky results, 32 points. Right, obviously, look at this. 17, Yuki Tsunoda suddenly waking up. Red Bull Racing, 32 points. And yeah, if he is able, to finish in the top 6, yeah, actually, that would mean that Tsunoda, could maybe even challenge for a top 10 spot, because he would have pretty much gotten 16 or 20 points, even though I think his biggest hope would be to dispose Alonso of 12th place, but maybe it was just a fluke of a result. And then 18, Pierre Gasly Alpine, 22 points. 19, Gabriel Bortolotto kicks over 19 points. He's been losing touch. He will hope to get some points. 20th, Franco Colapinto for Alpine. Will he get any points? He's on 0. And 21st, Jack Doohan Alpine, 0 points. So this is the Drivers' Championship. And obviously, for us, it's all about just holding on to that 5th and 6th. In the Constructors, 2025-2025 Championship, McLaren is leading with 770 points. Then we have Mercedes, 441 points. And yeah, with such lead, Red Bull Racing, they are third, 400 points. They won't be able to overhold them, but neither will we be able to do so. But there are, of course, 86 points on offer. So yeah, it is still possible, because as you can see over here, we are 4th on 378 points. All we need is to break our duck, get a 1-2 and a 1-2, and we will be 2nd, right? Yes, obviously the only silver lining would be that we would then have the more time to develop the car, a little bit like, for example, McLaren put a good use from 2023 to that Olympic 2024 season. But again, we're losing on the prize money, and especially 4th would be, we are obviously the most successful team in the history. We very often finish 2nd or 3rd as well, pretty much in over half of the season. So finishing 4th. Would classify us, 10 or 15 more seasons out of the 75 years of Formula 1. 5th is then, of course, Williams with 122 points. 6th, Racing Bulls, 90 points. Running strong. 7, Aston Martin, 74 points. 8, Haas, 73 points. 9, kicks over 68 points, so a lot to play for there, but now only for that 7, 8, 9 place. And 10, Alpine, 22 points. So as you can see, in the Constructors, the majority of the positions, about the 7, 8, and 9, can be pretty much decided here in Qatar. But that is definitely not what we can say of the Drivers' Championship, which looks like this. So we will see what happens. The qualifying will be absolutely important. Can Piastri, put it on pole position like I put it on those Qatar poles, to keep his title challenge going. Let's hope that the Red Bull will not raise us out of the ashes like they did last year in this particular race in Qatar, when they had a poor sprint and they did well. And let's hope it will be us, a bit like that, and Hamilton, into the qualifying 3, and hopefully into the first 2 rows on the grid. So yeah, a lot to play for. Obviously, if Norris looks up the pole position and manages to finish ahead of Verstappen, to me, that would be we could then sleep well, as Michael Schumacher's record over here would get to live at least for another 5 years into 2030s, right? And this is what it's all about. So you can see over here, we are obviously very passionate, and when you have a great history like Ferrari, and obviously great performance, which sadly we didn't have in the sprint. It's a lot of fun, and there's always the goal, the challenge you have to be looking for, and Now let's refresh, and go for that Grand Prix victory, because we've gotten that sprint victory, but we would really have loved to win the Grand Prix. So this is how I see it from my perspective. I also have to recover, go for another pole over here, and obviously in Qatar so far I believe I'm perfect in Qatar. So I definitely want to go over here, keep that great run going. So over here, everybody, I hope you enjoyed. Obviously, it is a terrible result, but it could have been much better, and I'm sure in the Grand Prix it will be much better, as we are sporting this fashion for the very last time. I hope you enjoyed the sprint races. I hope that we will have some sprint champions starting from the 2026-2026 season. You are looking at one a little bit sick, but definitely going for it. Yeah, the Smiling Sun champion, who has gotten the most points in the 6 sprint races in that 2024-2024 concurrent season, that I'm running, to become the sprint champion over here. It feels great, and obviously as the reigning champion, the 4-time Scuderia Ferrari champion, it feels great. So over here, let's hope in reality it will turn into the similar results. This was Jan, the Smiling Sun champion, giving you this exclusive reaction from our home sweet home. And now let's go, for that final race before November turns into the final month of the December of the 2020-25 season, to end it on a high, and then with the new regulation, start a new era of dominance of